Hello and welcome to another edition of East of Ethnia. This week I want to move a little bit outside of our usual region of concern and talk about Hungary. Next week, on this Sunday coming, there are elections in Hungary, and I feel fairly safe making the prediction that the results of these elections will see Viktor Orbán and his party, Fidesz, from which he is currently the prime minister and has been for quite some time, we'll see them out of power. And I feel pretty confident making this prediction because surveys are indicating that they're heading for a loss. And I feel also fairly secure making the prediction because it's more or less the consensus view of both domestic and international observers. So I think that what we'll see by Sunday night is indication that either the period of Viktor Orban in power has ended, or that he'll be taking a break from it, and another party will be in power. But let me say a couple of things about this. First of all, if this prediction turns out not to be right, and we see Fidesz winning a majority again and Viktor Orban staying in power, this will be very likely for one of three reasons. First, the absolutely extensive corruption and control exercised over election procedures. That is to say, there is a major effort to engage in fraud and vote buying, to encourage people to exchange votes for goods such as food, so that this can assure a result in the election. The general projection is that through this kind of activity, you can get a margin of something like 5% through fraud and vote buying. If the difference between your party and the party ahead of you is more than that, then there's basically a limit to how much you can get through vote buying. The other reason why they might stay in power is there is intensive engagement by allies of Orban in other countries, in power in other countries, to give him assistance. So that from the United States, he has the unconditional support of the current occupant of the presidency of the United States, Donald Trump, who is encouraging Hungarians to vote for Orban. From Russia, there is some even more complex and more involved support coming, including efforts to engage in publicity stunts and staged events before the election, so that, for example, there is at least a rumor that Russia had offered to help Hungary stage an assassination attempt against Orbán, so that he would appear to be the victim of an assassination attempt, um, and that this would increase his popularity in the short term. You may recall that during the last presidential election in the United States, there was a similar staged attempt against Trump. He went around for about a week wearing a maxi pad on his ear and claiming he had been hit by a bullet. And amazingly enough, some people believed this, and this increased his popularity for a time. The other reason would be because of the commitment of neighbors developing similar authoritarian regimes, little Orban-light regimes across the borders, in maintaining Orban in power because he gives them an inroads to the European Union, particularly on foreign and security policy, and is a voice for the far right generally in European politics. And we saw the first indication of this just a couple of days ago, with what appears to be a fake staged bombing attack right near the Hungarian border with Serbia, on the territory of Serbia, in the town of Kanizsa. So this is an attempt to try to create an atmosphere of panic that would assist Orban in an emergency way in the period moving right up to the election. So these are the reasons why these predictions might not turn out to be accurate. If it is accurate, then there are several things that will be shown by this that are going to be important for the region, for the rest of Europe, and maybe for some other parts of the world. And I think the first thing that happens with an election lost by Orban, who has been assiduously trying to control all election procedures, all media, increasingly education, and other institutions, is that it is possible to defeat a regime that amasses this much power in its favor with a sufficient level of mobilization. And that's going to be a lesson for people in other places who are trying to cope with the effects of similar regimes. But there's something else here, and that is that Orban, during his period in power, has invested very heavily in promoting the extreme right wing across Europe and internationally. He is one of the financiers of people like the politician from the openly racist party in the United Kingdom, Matthew Goodwin, a former academic who quit university to become a full-time racist, supporting other groups. It is not coincidental that he was discovered by the far right, now in power in the Republican Party in the United States, and made a partner, including doing things like holding meetings for their organizations in Budapest with him as an honored guest. So a defeat for Orban is a defeat for one of the central organizing um, institutions of the international right wing. And with any luck, this will be felt internationally. Another thing that a defeat for Orban will show, however, is the limitations on this kind of defeat. Because as happens in a lot of these cases, the candidate most likely to defeat him is a former associate of his who does not necessarily disagree with him on many of the most important points. So a kind of compromise candidate who is going to try to make a soft break with the legacy of the candidate that he defeats. And this is unfortunately something that we've seen in the region before and will probably see in the region again. I mean, we saw it in the first instance when in Serbia in 2000, Slobodan Milosevic was defeated by Vojislav Koštunica, a moderate Democrat with positions that were more or less identical to his positions. And Vojislav Koštunica spent much of the succeeding period attempting to soften efforts to achieve justice and to reveal facts about the violence during the period of Milosevic's rule. Eventually, Vojislav Koštunica would pay large rewards to people who were arrested as a part of the conspiracy to murder Koštunica's principal political opponent. That is to say, these compromise candidates, when they win, it looks like a victory, but very often it's not only that the amount of good that they can do is limited, sometimes they can do harm. Meaning that, as much as we can be optimistic about the likely defeat of Orban next week, we also need to have our eye out for something else, which is what people in the region, in Europe, and in the world really need. And that is a fully articulated alternative to the increasingly authoritarian governance of the far right. We would really like to see that emerge. We see signs of it emerging in a few places, but it'll be great when we see it as a real possibility. And that's my message for this week. Thank you for your time and attention, and we'll talk to you again.